A pilot's word is law at 30,000 feet. But on the ground, authority is a different game. When an arrogant captain, furious about a delay, stormed onto the frozen tarmac, he found a young engineer working on his plane. He decided to make an example of her. He yelled, he threatened, he berated her. What he didn't know was that the woman he was screaming at, a black engineer named Dr. Alani James, wasn't just there to fix his plane. She was there to judge it. And the credentials she was about to reveal held the power to end his career in the next 10 seconds. The call had come in at 3 a.m., a digital shriek that cut through the silence of Dr. Alani James's sterile, minimalist apartment. She didn't groggily search for the phone. She was instantly, analytically awake. The display read, FAA, JFK, urgent. James, she answered, her voice already clear. The voice on the other end was a familiar, stressed-out night supervisor from the New York field office. Dr. James, sorry about the hour. We've got a situation at JFK. Global Skyways 715, an A350-900 is AOG, aircraft on ground. They've been trying to clear a fault for 6 hours. They're stuck. The 715, that's the London flagship, Alani said, already sliding out of bed and heading for her coffee machine. What's the code? Intermittent fault on the primary pitch control actuator. Fly-by-wire. They've swapped the sensor twice, replaced the module. The fault clears, then it comes right back on the pre-flight test. The airline's mechanics are stumped, and they're about to cancel the flight and strand 300 people. They're requesting an FAA override to fly it to a maintenance hub. Alani paused, the coffee forgotten. An override on a primary flight control? Absolutely not. I'm 40 minutes out. Tell them to stand down, don't touch the avionics bay, and have the full maintenance logs ready for my review. Nobody touches that plane until I get there. Will do, Doctor. Alani hung up. This was why she got paid. Not just as an engineer, but as a designated engineering representative. A DER, with special authority from the Federal Aviation Administration. She wasn't just a mechanic with a wrench. She was a systems analyst, a detective. She found the ghosts in the machines that others couldn't, the ones that, if missed, ended up on the news. She dressed quickly, not in a standard issue uniform, but in high performance, insulated work pants and a thermal base layer. Over it, a dark grey quarter zip. She grabbed her go-bag and her most important tool, a locked carbon fiber Pelican case. Inside wasn't just a laptop, it was a $100,000 diagnostic interface that spoke directly to the aircraft's central nervous system. At 5:15 a.m., the tarmac at John F. Kennedy International was a special kind of hell. The temperature was just below freezing, and a relentless wind whipped off Jamaica Bay, carrying the metallic shriek of turbines and the acrid smell of jet A fuel. Alani, now in a high-visibility FAA vest, walked under the colossal wing of the Airbus A350. The ground crew, huddled near a heating cart, looked exhausted and defeated. A burly man in a grease-stained jacket, the lead mechanic, approached her. His name tag read, Petrovich. Dr. James, he said, his voice gruff but respectful. He'd seen her before. She had a reputation. Sully Petrovich, thanks for coming. This thing's possessed. Show me the logs, Alani said, forgoing pleasantries. They huddled over a tablet. Like we told dispatch, Sully explained. We get the 14 alpha pitch sensor fail code. We swapped the sensor. Code came back. We swapped the entire flight control module in the avionics bay. Code still came back. We've traced the wires. We've checked the pins. It looks clean. But every time we run the diagnostic, it fails. We're burning fuel on the APU. The passengers are at the gate. And the captain, well, he's agitated, Alani finished for him. That's a polite way to put it, Sully grunted. He's been down here twice already, asking why the wrench turners can't fix a simple sensor. Alani nodded. She knew the type. Okay, clear the area. I want everyone 50 feet back from the nose gear and the E&E bay. I'm plugging in. I need total sterile procedure. No one approaches, no one talks to me. No one even looks at the port until I'm done. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Sully said, impressed by her immediate command. He turned to his crew. You heard her. Back it up. Give the doctor room to work. Alani knelt by the access panel near the nose gear, the wind tearing at her hair. She pulled her hood up, plugged her headset into the Tarmac communications port, and then, with a key, unlocked her Pelican case. She connected her interface. The screen lit up with complex schematics. She wasn't just looking at the error code. She was watching the live data stream from the sensor itself. She wasn't just a mechanic. She was a surgeon, and the patient was a 250-ton marvel of technology, and she was about to find the cancer. Inside the warm, quiet cockpit of Global Skyways 715, Captain Mark Cutter Collins was vibrating with rage. He was 58 years old, with a military short grey haircut and a face that looked carved from granite. He had 25,000 flight hours, a background flying F-16s, and an unshakable belief that he was the supreme authority in his domain. His nickname, Cutter, came from his Air Force days, but the airline crews used it for his habit of cutting corners on procedures he deemed bureaucratic. This delay was an insult. 2 hours, David. He seethed at his first officer, David Chen. 2 hours we've been sitting here, burning gas, because these overpaid ground-pounders can't swap a part. David Chen, 15 years younger and far more placid, sipped his coffee. It's a fly-by-wire fault, Captain. It's complex. They said they're bringing in a specialist. A specialist? Cutter scoffed. A specialist is just the mechanic they call when the other mechanics give up. It's probably a rookie who read the manual more recently. I'm going down there. I'm tired of getting updates from the gate agent. I'm the pilot in command. This is my aircraft. David shifted, uncomfortable. Sir, I don't think that's good CRM. They're working on it. The FAA rep is here. Good, Collins snapped, unclipping his harness. The FAA rep can tell me to my face why they're grounding my plane over a faulty warning light. When I flew Vipers, we'd have a sensor go out. You'd tap the damn gauge, and you'd keep flying. This new generation is soft, afraid of their own shadows. He stormed out of the cockpit, marching down the jet bridge. The gate agent, a nervous woman named Sarah, tried to stop him. Captain Collins, you can't go on the tarmac while they're— I'm the picky, Sarah. Open the door, he commanded. He didn't wait. He swiped his own master access card and shoved the secure door open, emerging into the biting wind and the scream of the nearby Auxiliary Power Unit, APU. He marched toward the nose of the plane, his eyes scanning for the person in charge. He saw Sully's crew, standing well back, looking useless. Then he saw her, a small figure, kneeling by the open avionics bay, hood up, back to him. All he saw was a slight frame in a high-vis vest, typing on a laptop. She looked, to his eyes, like a new hire, a trainee, someone who had no business being that close to the brain of his A350. His stress, his arrogance, and his prejudice converged into a single, explosive moment. He didn't know her. He didn't care. She was a symbol of the incompetence that was ruining his schedule. He strode forward, his expensive leather flight shoes crunching on the gritty tarmac. "Hey, you!" he bellowed, his voice a parade ground roar that cut through the engine noise. Alani James, deep in concentration, heard the shout. It was so close, so aggressive, it broke her focus. She held up a single finger, the universal sign for "wait 1 second," as she finished a critical diagnostic sequence. This single gesture sent Captain Collins into an apoplectic fury. Ignored? By her? I'm not waiting. Stand up, he shouted, closing the distance. Get your hands off that panel. What the hell do you think you're doing? You ground crew are not authorized to interface with the primary flight bus. You'll corrupt the data. I want your name and your badge number. You are off this aircraft. Now. Sully and his crew froze, their faces pale with horror. F.O. Chen, who had followed his captain at a distance, stopped dead on the tarmac. Dr. Alani James carefully saved the data log. She unplugged her custom interface from the port. The diagnostic screen went dark. She slowly, deliberately, placed the device back in its pelican case and snapped the latches shut. The wind whipped her hood, but she seemed to be in the eye of her own private storm. She stood up. She was not a small woman, but she was shorter than Collins. She turned to face him, her movements measured and economical. She reached up and slowly pulled back her hood, revealing her face. Her eyes were not angry. They were not intimidated. They were cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of fear. Collins, primed for a cowering mechanic, was momentarily taken aback by the sheer, icy intelligence in her gaze. But he was in too deep. He doubled down. "Who are you?" he snarled. "Where is your supervisor? I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I am ordering you—" "You," Alani interrupted, her voice not loud, but so sharp it sliced the air, "are in a great deal of trouble." "Trouble?" Collins laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You're the one who's fired, sweetheart. You're touching equipment you have no clearance for. I'm writing you up, and I'll have your airport credentials pulled by noon." "First," Alani said, taking one precise step toward him, "you are in violation of Federal Aviation Regulation 121-533, interfering with the duties of a crew member, except in this case, I am the crew member, and you are the interference." "I am not crew," Collins spat. "I am the captain." "You are the pilot in command of a non-airworthy vehicle," Alani stated, "which makes you, at this present moment, a pedestrian. A pedestrian who is in violation of sterile tarmac protocol. A pedestrian who is impeding a federal investigation. And a pedestrian," she added, her eyes narrowing, "who is screaming at a federal agent." Collins's smug, furious expression began to falter. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Federal agent? What are you, airport police?" "No," Alani said. She reached inside her jacket, past the high-vis vest, and pulled out a lanyard. The credential she held was not the bright orange of the Port Authority. It was not the blue and white of Global Skyways. It was a deep, holographic, government blue badge that seemed to absorb the dim morning light. At the top, the unmistakable, imposing seal of a golden eagle. The words were stark. United States Department of Transportation. Federal Aviation Administration. Collins's breath hitched. His eyes darted from the badge to her face. He was no longer looking at a mechanic. Alani let him read the lines below the seal. Name: Dr. Alani R. James. Title: Aerospace Safety Engineer, NTSB FAA Special Operations. And then at the bottom, highlighted in a blood-red box, was the designation that made Sully's crew, watching from 50 feet away, visibly flinch. Clearance. Level 5. Red Flag Authority. Captain Mark Cutter. Collins's face went from flushed red to a sick, pasty white. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like he might faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He knew what Red Flag Authority meant. It was a rare, high-level clearance given only to a handful of FAA and NTSB engineers. It meant she was a designated engineering representative of the highest order. It didn't just give her the authority to ground his plane. It gave her the authority to ground every single A350 in the United States with a single phone call. She didn't work for the airline. She policed the airline, and he had just called her sweetheart. "Captain Mark Collins," Alani said, her voice now resonating with the full weight of the federal government. "You have, in the last 90 seconds, intimidated a federal agent, interfered with a critical safety investigation, and attempted to use your command authority to override an FAA directive. You have compromised a sterile work environment." She turned her head slightly. "First officer." David Chen, who looked like he wanted the tarmac to swallow him, jogged forward, his face a mask of anxiety. "Yes, ma'am." "Your name?" Alani commanded. "First Officer David Chen, ma'am." "First Officer Chen, you are a witness to this. Captain Collins, give me your pilot's license and your airline credentials. Now." Collins was frozen. This was a nightmare. "Now hold on," he stammered, his voice a fraction of its former volume. This is a misunderstanding. I was concerned for the safety of my aircraft. I didn't see your ID." "You didn't ask for my ID," Alani corrected him, her voice lethal. "You assumed. You saw a woman, you saw a person of color, and you assumed incompetence. You assumed you had the right to yell. You didn't follow a single protocol. Your concern manifested as a threat. You are a liability." "You can't take my license," he protested, his voice cracking with panic. "I am not taking it," Alani said. "I am placing it on temporary administrative hold, pending my formal report. You are officially stood down. You are unfit to fly." She looked at F.O. Chen. "Mr. Chen, neither of you are to step foot in that cockpit. You will both be escorted to the gate, where you will wait for the Global Skyways Station Manager and Port Authority Security. Is that understood?" I, Collins sputtered. "Is that understood?" Alani's voice snapped like a rifle shot. "Yes," Collins whispered. His 25,000 hours of experience, his cutter reputation, all of it evaporated into the cold morning air. "Sully," Alani called over to the mechanics. "Get Port Authority to gate C-26. Now." Sully, looking at Alani with a newfound sense of awe, was already on his radio. "Dispatch, I need PD at C-26, main terminal. An FAA request." Alani gestured with her head toward the jet bridge. "Go. Wait for me in the operations office." Captain Collins, the man who was a god in the air, turned. His shoulders were slumped. He and David Chen began the longest walk of their lives. The walk of shame, back across the tarmac, past the ground crew who refused to make eye contact, and up the stairs to the gate. The king had been dethroned. Alani turned back to the A350. She took a deep breath, pushing the confrontation from her mind. The anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. The problem was still there. She knelt, reopened her case, and plugged her interface back into the port. "Okay," she murmured to the machine. "Let's find out what you're really trying to tell me." Alani James didn't just find the problem. She found a catastrophe waiting to happen. For the next hour, she bypassed the onboard diagnostics, which were clearly being fooled, and went deeper. She ran a time-domain reflectometry test, sending tiny electrical pulses down the wires from the avionics bay to the tailplane sensor. The test measured the echo of that pulse. A clean wire gives a clean echo, and damaged wire gives a jumbled one. Her screen lit up. The echo was jumbled. "It's not the sensor," she whispered. "It's the path." She traced the wiring loom back from the port into the dense, packed guts of the aircraft's E&E, electronics and equipment bay. It took another 30 minutes of contorting her body in the cramped space, following the bundle of hundreds of wires. And then she saw it. It was almost invisible. A single wiring harness, wrapped in protective casing, was resting against a hydraulic line bracket. The bracket had been installed at the factory, but a zip tie meant to hold the harness away from it had snapped or was never installed. Every time the aircraft pressurized, warmed up, or vibrated, that harness was rubbing against the sharp milled aluminum edge of the bracket. Over hundreds of flights, it had slowly, patiently rubbed through the outer insulation. The ghost wasn't a ghost. It was a short. The pitch control sensor wire was periodically making contact with the metal bracket, grounding out the signal and sending the fail code to the cockpit. The reason the mechanics couldn't find it was because it only happened when the plane was at a specific temperature or vibration frequency. This wasn't loading just a fault. It was a fleet-wide manufacturing defect. If this had happened in the air, during a critical phase like landing or takeoff, the pilots could have lost their primary pitch control. It was a crash in waiting. Alani had just found a ticking times bomb, not just for this plane, but for every A350 that came off that specific assembly line. She documented everything. Photos, data readings. She took a sample of the chafed wire. She placed a temporary FAA-approved repair on the line, rerouting and insulating it, just to make the aircraft safe to be ferried, empty, to a maintenance base. Then she closed her case and walked back to the gate. The scene in the operations office was tense. The Global Skyways station manager, Karen Fields, was there, alongside two bewildered Port Authority officers. Collins and Chen sat in plastic chairs. Collins was trying to project authority, but he just looked pale. Alani walked in, and the room fell silent. She ignored Collins and addressed the station manager. Karen, Global Skyways 715 is now under a mandatory FAA red flag hold. This aircraft will not be flying with passengers today or tomorrow. The fault is a critical manufacturing defect in the wiring harness. I'm issuing an emergency airworthiness directive to the entire Global Skyways A350 fleet, effective immediately. Every one of your A350s is grounded, pending inspection. Karen's jaw dropped. Grounded? The whole fleet? That's millions of dollars. That's our entire international schedule. Millions of dollars is cheaper than a hull loss, Alani said coolly. She then turned her gaze to Collins. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. As for this, she said, holding up a small data recorder, I am filing a formal incident report with the FAA's Office of Professional Responsibility and with your airline's VP of Flight Operations, Mr. Henderson. Collins shot to his feet. This is insane. I was doing my job. You're on a power trip. You can't just ground a man. I can, Alani stated, her voice dangerously quiet. And I am. Your job, Captain Collins, is to practice crew resource management. Your job is to ensure safety. What you did on that tarmac was the opposite of safety. You created a hostile, dangerous environment. You intimidated a technician who you assumed was a subordinate, while she was interfacing with a live, critical flight system. What if I had been a junior mechanic? What if your screaming had caused her to make a mistake, to input the wrong code, to miss the very fault that could bring this plane down? She took a step closer. You didn't see an engineer. You saw someone you didn't think belonged. You bellowed at me. You called me sweetheart. You threatened my job. All without once asking the single most important question a pilot in command should ask. What is the status of my aircraft? Collins had no answer. He just stood there, breathing hard. Your behavior, Alani concluded, is not just unprofessional. It is a direct threat to the chain of safety. First Officer Chen, you will be required to give a full statement. Captain Collins, your license is suspended. You will be drug and alcohol tested, per FAA protocol for a ground incident, and you will surrender your airport ID to these officers. The two Port Authority officers, now understanding the gravity of the situation, stepped toward Collins. "Captain, your ID, please." Collins, shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation, slowly reached into his pocket. He didn't look at Alani. He looked at his first officer, a look of pure betrayal. But Chen wouldn't meet his gaze. The cutter had been cut, grounded, defeated. Not by a storm or a mechanical failure, but by a 5-foot 8-inch engineer with a level 5 clearance badge and a spine made of titanium. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, but not for Alani. For her, it was just the beginning of the paperwork. She spent the next 72 hours writing 2 of the most important reports of her career. The first was Emergency Airworthiness Directive 2025 or 23/04. It was a technical masterpiece. It detailed the chafing on the wiring loom, the failure of the zip tie, and the precise time domain reflectometry readings. It mandated an immediate inspection of all A350-900 aircraft with serial numbers in a specific range. Within 48 hours, Airbus had confirmed her findings. They found the same issue on 8 other aircraft around the world. Dr. Alani James had, without exaggeration, saved potentially thousands of lives. Airbus and the FAA feted her as a hero. The second report was FAA Incident Report IR 715 JFK. This report was not about wiring. It was about behavior. It was a cold, factual, second-by-second account of her interaction with Captain Mark Collins. It quoted him verbatim, "What the hell do you think you're doing? I want your name and your badge number. You are off this aircraft, now." "You're the one who's fired, sweetheart." She framed his actions not as an emotional outburst, but as a critical failure of the sterile environment protocol and a dangerous exhibition of a hazardous cockpit authority gradient. Language that, to the FAA, is a cardinal sin. It suggests a captain who won't listen, who intimidates his crew, and who puts his ego ahead of procedure. This report landed on the desk of Alan Henderson, the VP of Flight Operations at Global Skyways. It was accompanied by a formal notice from the FAA that Captain Collins's ATP license was suspended pending a full professional and psychological fitness review. Collins, meanwhile, had hired a high-priced lawyer from the pilots' union. He was in a sterile conference room at the Global Skyways headquarters, ready for war. "This is a witch hunt," Collins blustered to Henderson and the union rep. "This Dr. James was on a power trip. She was looking for a confrontation. I acted as pick to protect my aircraft from an unknown individual." Henderson, a former pilot himself, just looked at him with tired eyes. "An unknown individual, Mark? Sully Petrovich and his entire crew knew who she was. They were standing 50 feet away. You didn't ask them. You didn't ask the gate agent. You just started yelling. I was stressed. The flight was late." "That's the problem, Mark," Henderson said. "A pilot can't let stress dictate his actions. What if you were on a difficult approach in a thunderstorm? Would you yell at the air traffic controller?" "That's different." "Is it?" Henderson countered. "Or is it that you thought she was a low-level mechanic you could bully? We pulled your file, Mark. And this isn't the first time." Collins's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" The HR vice president, a stern woman named Linda, slid a file across the table. "March 2021. A formal complaint from a flight attendant, Jennifer Riley, in Frankfurt. You allegedly called her useless in front of passengers when she couldn't find your preferred brand of coffee. The airline settled it." "She was incompetent," Linda continued. "October 2023. A gate agent in Dallas, Maria Sanchez. You publicly berated her and called her a moron because a seating assignment was incorrect. You received a formal written warning." That was different," Collins stammered. "And now," Henderson said, You've done it to a federal agent with the power to ground our fleet. Which, by the way, she did. This power trip, as you call it, is going to cost this airline over $15 million in grounded aircraft, inspections, and passenger rebookings, and that's just this week. The union rep, who had been silent, finally spoke. Mark, what did First Officer Chen say? Is he backing your story? Just then, the door opened, and David Chen walked in, having just finished his own interview. He looked pale. David, Collins said, a desperate, commanding tone in his voice. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I was just doing my job. David Chen looked at Collins, then at the executives. He took a deep breath. He had been a first officer for 7 years, and he'd spent 5 of them terrified of captains like Collins. But Alani's professionalism, her ice-cold courage, had sparked something in him. I can't do that, Captain, David said quietly. You were out of line. You were yelling before she even turned around. You called her sweetheart. You threatened her. It wasn't professional. And, to be honest, sir, it's not the first time I've seen you treat staff that way. I can't lie about it. Not for an FAA report. The betrayal hit Collins like a physical blow. He stared at his co-pilot, his face a mask of disbelief. The union rep slowly closed his briefcase. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. Mark, Henderson said, his voice funereal. You've created a pattern of abuse, a pattern of intimidation. This time, you just happened to do it to the one person on Earth who could end your career for it. Global Skyways is terminating your employment, effective immediately. The termination of his employment was not an end. It was the beginning of the hard karma, a slow, systematic, and agonizing disassembly of the man known as Cutter Collins. His firing from Global Skyways was the first domino. The second was the official, formal notice from the Federal Aviation Administration. His airline transport pilot, ATP, license was not just suspended. It was subject to an emergency revocation hearing on the grounds of FAA Part 61. 15D. Gross negligence and willful endangerment, and FAA Part 91. 13. Careless or reckless operation so as to endanger the life or property of another. Collins, fueled by a lifetime of unchallenged arrogance and a pilot union lawyer who promised to fight these bureaucrats, made his fatal mistake. He demanded the hearing. He believed he could walk into a room, unleash his 25,000 hours of experience, and intimidate a panel of desk jockey administrators. He was wrong. The hearing was held 2 months later, in a sterile, windowless conference room in a federal building in Washington, D.C. The air hummed with the sound of cheap fluorescent lights. There was no jury, only a panel of 3. A senior FAA administrator named Administrator Thorne, a former NTSB chief investigator, and a stern-faced legal counsel. Collins sat at one table, looking stiff and important in his old captain's uniform, which he'd worn for effect. At the other table sat the FAA's counsel and their primary witness, Dr. Alani James. She was not in a high-vis vest. She was in a simple, dark blue business suit, her hair tied back. She looked to Collins unremarkable. He still couldn't understand how this woman had done this to him. Captain Collins, the FAA lawyer began, his voice flat. You have stated that you were acting in your capacity as pilot in command to secure your aircraft from a perceived threat. Is that correct? That is correct, Collins said, his voice booming with false confidence. I saw an unidentified individual interfacing with my primary flight controls. I did what any PC would do. I took command. You took command by yelling, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" It was a high-stress situation. The tarmac is loud. I had to be forceful. Did you, the lawyer continued, at any point ask this unidentified individual for her credentials? There wasn't time. She was dismissive. She held up her hand to me. So you escalated, the lawyer said, and at that point you called her sweetheart? Collins's face flushed. His own lawyer had told him to deny it. I don't recall that specific word. You don't? Let's refresh your memory. The lawyer played a small audio file. It was from Alani's own federally mandated pocket audio recorder, which she'd activated the moment he approached. The sound of the APU whine was deafening, but Collins's voice, laced with fury, cut right through it. Fired, sweetheart. You're touching equipment you have no clearance for. Collins sank slightly in his chair. The panel members just made notes, their faces impassive. Captain Collins, the lawyer said, Dr. James's report states you were, in her words, irate, physically intimidating, and creating a hazardous distraction. You dispute this? She's a liar. She was on a power trip. This is a simple misunderstanding she has blown out of proportion to make a name for herself. It was time for Alani's testimony. She took the stand. Dr. James, the lawyer began, his voice softening with respect. Please describe for the panel what you were doing at the precise moment Captain Collins approached. Alani's voice was the opposite of Collins's. It was quiet, precise, and absolutely unshakable. I was running a time domain reflectometry test on the primary pitch control harness. It's a non-invasive diagnostic that requires an uninterrupted data stream. I was 90 seconds into a 120-second test. And what would have happened if you had, as Captain Collins demanded, stood up and gotten your hands off the panel? The test would have been corrupted, Alani said simply. The data log would have been lost. I would have been unable to find the intermittent short. The ghost, as the mechanics called it, would have remained. Administrator Thorne looked up from his notes. What is your professional assessment of that outcome, Doctor? My assessment, Alani said, looking directly at the panel, is that Global Skyways 715 would have eventually been cleared for service. The fault would have remained hidden until it failed completely. Based on the degradation of the wire, this would have likely occurred during a high vibration phase, such as takeoff or final approach. The result would have been a catastrophic, uncommanded loss of pitch control, leading to the loss of the aircraft and all 312 souls on board. The room was so quiet, the hum of the lights sounded like a roar. Collins's lawyer was scribbling furiously. Alani continued. Captain Collins's concern for his aircraft did not protect it. His actions directly threatened it. His uncontrolled rage, his failure to follow even the most basic tarmac protocol, which would be to ask the lead mechanic, Mr. Petrovich, for a status, created a critical safety hazard. He wasn't just yelling at me, Administrator. He was, by his own reckless behavior, actively jeopardizing the investigation that would have saved his plane. And his language, the FAA lawyer prompted. He called me sweetheart. He threatened my job. He assumed, because I am a woman, and a black woman, that I was a wrench turner who was out of her depth. Alani finally turned and looked at Collins, her eyes holding no anger, only a cold, analytical fire. His actions were not just unprofessional. They were a textbook example of a hazardous cockpit authority gradient, where a pilot's ego and prejudices override protocol and crew resource management. He did not see a federal agent. He saw someone he didn't think belonged, and in his attempt to bully me, he nearly buried the evidence of a fleet-wide defect. Collins was done. He knew it. But the karma wasn't finished. The FAA lawyer turned to the panel. This was not an isolated incident. He produced a file. It was Collins's HR record from Global Skyways, subpoenaed for the hearing. March 2021, a formal harassment complaint from a flight attendant, Jennifer Riley, in Frankfurt, after Captain Collins allegedly called her useless and a bimbo in front of passengers. October 2023, a formal reprimand after berating a gate agent, Maria Sanchez, in Dallas, calling her a moron and throwing a manifest at her. And most damning, the lawyer said, a confidential report from First Officer David Chen, filed 3 months before the JFK incident, stating that Captain Collins routinely creates a hostile cockpit environment, dismisses checklist procedures he deems bureaucratic, and fosters an atmosphere where the first officer is afraid to speak up. The Cutter nickname. It wasn't just about cutting corners. It was about cutting down his crew. Collins's face was ashen. This wasn't a hearing. It was an autopsy of his entire career. Administrator Thorne leaned forward. Captain Collins, you have built a 30-year career on a foundation of intimidation. You seem to believe that authority and arrogance were the same thing. They are not. Dr. James, he said, nodding to her, exercised true authority, the authority of knowledge, procedure, and a federal mandate. You exercised simple, vulgar-grade bullying. The panel finds that your actions on November 12th were not an aberration, but the climax of a documented, hazardous pattern of behavior. You have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are psychologically unfit to be in command of a passenger aircraft. Therefore, Thorne said, his voice flat, pursuant to FAA Part 61.15, the Federal Aviation Administration hereby permanently revokes your airline transport pilot license. You are grounded, sir. Effective immediately. It was the death sentence, a suspension he could have recovered from. Revocation was a black mark that would never, ever be erased. He was uninsurable, unhirable. He would never again legally sit in the left-hand seat of a major U.S. carrier. But the karma was still not done. The story was too good. A disgruntled Global Skyways employee leaked Alani's full, unredacted incident report to an aviation blogger. The headline went viral, "The Grounding of Cutter." Collins, how one pilot's rampage at a black engineer grounded an entire A350 fleet. The story was picked up by mainstream news. It was the perfect narrative. The arrogant, privileged pilot versus the quiet, brilliant, black female engineer who not only saved hundreds of lives, but also took him down in the process. Dr. Alani James became an overnight hero, a symbol for women in STEM everywhere. Mark Collins became a pariah. His friends in the industry, other cutter types, stopped returning his calls. He was toxic. His nickname was now a punchline in ready rooms. Don't pull a cutter on your walk-around. The final crushing blow came from Global Skyways. Furious at the $15 million in losses from the grounding and facing a PR nightmare, their legal team found an opening. They filed a civil suit against him. They claimed his willful and gross misconduct, violating federal law by interfering with an FAA agent, broke the morals clause in his high-level contract. They weren't just firing him. They were suing him to claw back his last 5 years of bonuses and his entire unvested pension. Mark Collins, the man who had a multi-million-dollar home in Connecticut, 2 sports cars and a 25,000-hour ego, was now facing total, complete, and utter ruin. He had lost his job. He had lost his license. He had lost his reputation. And now he was about to lose his fortune, all because he couldn't stand the sight of a black woman in a position of authority. All because he had to yell. All because he had to call her sweetheart. The next 6 months were not a quiet return to normalcy. They were a cascade, a series of dominoes set in motion by the collision of arrogance and authority on the JFK tarmac. For the three people at the center of that 5 a.m. confrontation, their worlds were fundamentally and irreversibly altered. For Dr. Alani James, the 72 hours following the incident were a blur of high-stakes, caffeine-fueled work. Her desk at the FAA's New York field office became the global epicenter for the A350. First, she filed Emergency Airworthiness Directive, AD, 2025 Tort and 23004. It was not a suggestion, it was a federal order. It mandated the immediate inspection of 1-200 Airbus A350s worldwide. The AD, which she wrote herself, was a masterpiece of technical precision. It detailed the exact harness, the failed part number of the zip tie, and the TDR, time domain reflectometry, signature of the fault. Airlines and maintenance crews weren't told to look for a problem. They were given a map and told, X marks the spot. The backlash was instantaneous and volcanic. Airlines, already operating on razor-thin margins, screamed. Millions of dollars in flights were being cancelled. Airbus, whose reputation was built on flawless engineering, was in crisis. They politely, but firmly, suggested Dr. James's finding was a one-off anomaly on an older airframe. Alani's response was to board a plane to the Airbus delivery center in Hamburg, Germany, where a brand-new A350, with less than 10 hours of flight time, was waiting for its airline. She walked into the pristine hangar with a team of skeptical, white-coated Airbus engineers. They were polite, but their faces were tight with professional pride and irritation. "Dr. James," said the lead engineer, a stern man named Klaus, "we appreciate your diligence. But this aircraft is fresh from the assembly line. Our quality control is the most rigorous on the planet. The idea that a harness tie would be fractured is—" "Show me," Alani said, pointing. "Open the E&E bay. Bring a borescope." 30 minutes later, the hangar was silent. Klaus held the borescope camera, his face pale. On the high-definition monitor, everyone could see it. The brand-new harness, the snapped plastic zip tie, and the tiny, almost invisible white scuff mark on the loom's grey sheath, where, after only 10 hours of test flying, it was already beginning to chafe against the aluminum bracket. It wasn't a fault. It was a design flaw. Klaus slowly pulled the scope out and looked at Alani. The professional arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, icy horror. "Mein Gott," he whispered. "You were right." From that moment, Alani was no longer just an FAA inspector. She became the most important safety engineer in the world. She was flown to the Airbus headquarters in Toulouse, France. She wasn't there as a guest. She was there as a regulator. For the next 4 months, she led the joint FAA-ESA, European Union Aviation Safety Agency, task force to redesign the harness routing. This brings us to 6 months after the incident. Alani stood at the head of a massive, polished boardroom table. The room was filled with 50 of Airbus's top aerospace engineers and executives. "Good morning," she began, and the room fell silent. "We are here because a $1 part created a $1 billion problem. The original design, frankly, was flawed. It placed a critical system in a passive, high-risk failure mode. Vibration harmonics and material fatigue were not properly accounted for." She clicked to the next slide. "This is the solution." It wasn't a new zip tie. It was a completely redesigned component. It was a non-abrasive, PEEK polymer clasp with a dual lock mechanism. It didn't just hold the harness, it isolated it, rerouting it a full 3 centimeters from the bracket and encasing it in a vibration-dampening sleeve. The part was over-engineered to have a 500,000-hour service life, longer than the aircraft itself. When she finished, there was a long silence. The head of engineering, a distinguished Frenchman named Bastien, stood up. "Dr. James," he said, his voice resonating with genuine humility, "you have come into our house, and, with respect and precision, you have pointed out a flaw that we could not see. You have not just saved our fleet, you have forced us to be better engineers. This new component, it will be known in our manuals as the James Tate clasp, after her and the Airbus engineer who co-designed it. On behalf of all of us, merci." The room erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause. It was the highest form of respect, the respect of her peers. She had earned her authority not by yelling, but by being correct. Later that day, she received an email on her secure server. It was from the FAA administrator. She was being promoted to Chief of the Special Operations Division, Airworthiness Directive Task Force. She was now officially one of the most powerful safety engineers in the federal government. On the exact same day, 4,000 miles away, David Chen stood in a brightly lit briefing room at JFK. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders were new, the jacket still smelled of the tailor's shop. "Good morning, crew," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Welcome to Global Skyways 715, non-stop to London Heathrow." He was the new captain of the route. After the incident, Global Skyways had been terrified. The FAA had torn through their operations. They didn't just want Collins gone, they wanted a cultural shift. They wanted proof that their pilots understood crew resource management, CRM. David Chen's witness statement, honest, factual, and damning, had marked him as a leader. He was fast-tracked, tested, and promoted. His pre-flight briefing was the antithesis of Collins's. "Weather looks good, a little chop over Greenland." "Sarah," he said, making eye contact with the lead flight attendant, "I'll give you a 20-minute heads-up before the bumps, so you can secure the carts. No rush. I'd rather you be safe than fast." He turned to his first officer, a young woman just out of training. "And Emily, this is your leg. I'll handle the radios. You fly the plane. If you see me do anything that you don't like or don't understand, you are required to call me on it. My door is open. Clear?" "Yes, Captain," she said, smiling. The entire crew was relaxed. They weren't being led by an ego. They were part of a team. Later, on his walk around, David stopped at the nose gear of the A350, the very same aircraft, N715GS, now fully repaired and certified. He looked up at the ENE bay hatch. It now bore a small, stenciled yellow triangle, the official mark of the James Tate clasp modification. He touched the cold aluminum fuselage, a silent gesture of thanks. Settled in the left-hand seat, he booted up the flight computers. As the systems came online, he took a moment to type a short, professional email on his tablet. To ajamesfa.gov subject. "Thank you, Dr. James. This is Captain David Chen, formerly FO on GSA 715. I am piloting that route today, and I just performed the walk-around on N715GS. I wanted to express my professional gratitude. What you did that day, it wasn't just about a wire. You upheld a standard that makes all of us safer. You reminded me what real authority looks like. Thank you. Respectfully, Captain D. Chen." He hit send. His first officer gave him the thumbs up. "Ready for pushback, Captain." David keyed the mic, his voice clear and confident. "JFK ground, Global 715, ready to push." For Mark Cutter Collins, the fall was not a single event. It was a slow-motion avalanche that buried him. The first 24 hours were a blur of humiliating administrative leave calls. The drug and alcohol test came back clean, but it didn't matter. The report from Dr. James, combined with the witness statements from Chen and Saleh Petrovich, was indestructible. His union lawyer, A man who had saved dozens of pilots from DUIs and minor infractions looked at the file with a grim face. "Mark, I can't fight this." "What do you mean you can't fight it?" Collins had roared, his face purple. "It's my word against hers. She's a power-tripping—" "No, Mark, it's not. It's your word against an FAA Level 5 DER, your entire ground crew, and your own first officer," the lawyer said flatly. "You didn't just yell, Mark. You interfered with a federal investigation, and you called her sweetheart on an open tarmac? Do you know what that's called? That's the nail. That's the nail that seals the coffin." The FAA moved with terrifying speed. His ATP license wasn't just suspended, it was revoked pending a full psychological fitness review, a review everyone knew he would fail. Global Skyways, under the unblinking eye of the FAA and a PR nightmare, terminated his employment for cause. This one word, cause, was the financial guillotine. He lost his $400,000 a year salary. He lost his unvested stock options. He lost his flight privileges. He lost his pension. The man who saw himself as a god in the sky was now a 58-year-old unemployed man with no transferable skills and a black mark on his record so deep it was a crater. His wife, who had endured his arrogance for 30 years, saw the pension disappear. That was the last straw. She filed for divorce. 6 months after the incident, Mark Collins was a ghost. The scene is a flat, cracked pavement airfield in rural Okeechobee, Florida. The air is 100 degrees and thick with humidity and the smell of swamp gas. Mark Collins, wearing a sweat-stained polo shirt, stands beside a 1974 Cessna 150. The plane's blue paint is faded to a chalky powder. The vinyl seats are cracked. His student, a 19-year-old kid named Leo, is looking at TikTok on his phone. "Leo, get off the damn phone," Collins growls. His voice is a gravelly wreck. "Chill, bro," Leo says, not looking up. "Just checking my messages." "I am not your bro. I am your instructor. I am Captain Collins, and I demand your respect. I have flown combat missions. I have 25,000 hours. Leo finally looks up, his eyes utterly blank and unimpressed. "Yeah? And now you're here, with me, in this piece of junk, for $50 an hour. So, can we just fly, or—" The impotence of the moment crushed Collins. The kid was right. His 25,000 hours meant nothing. His F-16 days were stories. His title was a joke. He had no authority here. He was just the help. "Fine," Collins mutters, his rage collapsing into a sour, empty depression. "Get in the plane. Let's see if you can even do a simple stall without crying." They climbed into the sweltering cockpit. The single prop engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life, shaking the entire airframe. As they taxied toward the runway, Collins stared out the vibrating, scratched plexiglass window. High above, at 40,000 feet, a new A350, on its way from Miami to Paris, cut a perfect white contrail across the deep blue sky. It was a silent, graceful symbol of a world he could see, but could never, ever touch again. He was grounded. His wings hadn't been clipped, they'd been ripped from his back. And the worst part, the part that ate at him every single second of every single day, was that he knew, deep in the one part of his soul he could never lie to, he had done it all to himself. Captain Collins learned the hard way that in the world of aviation there are layers of authority, and the highest authority isn't always the one with the loudest voice. It's the one with the deepest knowledge. Dr. Alani James wasn't just fixing a part, she was protecting a system. The system caught the fault in the wire, and it also caught the fault in the man. What do you think? Was this karma served too hard, or was it exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about justice, underdogs, and hard-earned respect, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to see that what goes around always comes around. Thanks for watching.